Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook. I'm the CEO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our HCMx Radio podcast. Today, I am excited to have with me and collaborating with me on our talk today is Jodi Detjen. She's the managing partner from Orange Grove Consultant and clinical professor of management MBA program director at Suffolk University. Welcome, Jodi.
Hi, Rachel. Good to see you again.
I know, it's great to see you, even though it's virtual. For those of you, you may have seen Jodi at our conferences, and we've been collaborating for a number of years through our online events as well as joint research. We did a study last year on male allyship. We had a great session at the beginning of the year at our HCM Excellence Conference, and Jodi was going to join us for our Diversity and Inclusion Summit this summer, but we had to shift gears here, and we've been doing a series of podcasts and webinars, and so today we're going to talk about a little bit about what Jodi's been up to. So welcome, Jodi.
Hi, welcome. Thank you.
And we are, so tell me a little bit about, how you've been during this time and what you've been doing to keep yourself busy.
Well, it's funny because for me, everybody's like, oh, what have you been doing with your spare time? I'm thinking, well, I haven't really had any spare time. We tried to get everything up and running with the university, so that was an enormous amount of work because things changed so much over the summer. And then from a business perspective, we do so much inclusion work that we've been actually very, very busy. And so for me, the difference has been I'm sitting here on this chair for far too long, but other than that, I'm still working really hard.
We were chatting about that earlier. Yeah, same here. We have been busy, which is great. We've seen a lot of companies that have continued the same way, even in spite of the shutdown and transitioning to remote environments. Those companies that have had, I think, technology already established and have been developing or have had a blended approach to developing their people, they haven't really skipped a beat. I think they're just more around prioritizing what to do, what programs that were in person, do they transition them entirely to virtual, or do they do a subset of that and then wait until later until they can? So it's been interesting. And so the work that you do and working with, can you share with our listeners and viewers today just a little bit about some of the things that you felt that have been effective during this time frame?
Yeah, so some of our work, we have consulting, we have research, and then we have a training component. And one of the things that we've realized is that with the training component, this moving online has been phenomenal for people because it's a lot easier for people to access. It's not this, okay, let's bring everybody to one location and have this big hoo-ha. It's actually cheaper, more effective. And because there's so many online tools to actually do training, we found it's just as interactive. And in some cases, actually even more interactive because people are really open online. So we haven't found any learning loss in the way we do things. Now, of course, we've been teaching online for a long time. So for us, it really wasn't a transition. It was sort of just, we do more of it, but we've been doing it for so long that we haven't really missed a beat either with that. And then the consulting, there has been a change there because that's become much more online versus in-person facilitation. But even there, I think what people are open now because they've been working online for so long now for the last 6-7 months because of the COVID thing. I'm finding people are more open, people are willing to do it. And again, there's a lot more ease around it because of I can go from one meeting to the next and I don't have these transaction costs. And so people have time. So I find that there's a lot more focus and interest in the work that we're doing from a tactical facilitation perspective.
I agree, and I see that companies or people there's this, I think, the level of expectation of It doesn't have to be perfect. The setup doesn't have to be perfect. The audio doesn't have to be perfect. There's a little bit more of forgiveness for that, where in the
Yeah.
past, I think as administrators or facilitators, there was so much stress and so much in making sure everything was perfect, right?
Yeah.
Whether it was in person or virtual. And I
Yeah.
think also from the end user or from the employee or the audience, it's like you had to get the most out of your time and your experience. You had to, everything had to be perfect. And also, if you're joining something virtually, if you're at home doing so, you can't have a kid come into your
Yeah.
your environment. You can't have the dogs barking. You can't have the mailman coming to the door knocking. So I think things like this, I don't know, it's removed that level of perfection, but
Yes.
not to the that we shouldn't focus on the experience. So I
Yes.
think it's created a different mindset. And let's talk about inclusion, because I know that's
Sure.
something we're going to speak if we did have a summit and we had now, created these series of short podcasts and webinars to talk about some of these important topics. You're launching a book this year on inclusion later, and we did that work on male allyship. So all this is kind of part of inclusion. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so our book, The Next Smart Step, came out in an e-version on September 15th, and then because of COVID, we had to split the e-version from the hardcover. So the hardcover is coming out February 9th. It's on Amazon right now. The interesting thing that we found is that, so first off, our overall philosophy on inclusion is that inclusion is a business strategy like any other business strategy. So you have a business strategy on creating a new product, or you might have a business strategy on entering a new market. Well, figuring out inclusion is just another business strategy. And so that's the way we approach it. And we think about it, and it enables people to access it, because a lot of times what we hear is, well, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. And so when we put it in that frame, it makes people really, really calm down and think, okay, well, we've done that before. We know how to do that. And so now let's start thinking about it that way. And we just create our operational strategy. So that's the first frame, I would say. The second thing that I think is really important from a framing perspective is that we really look at this as a competitive advantage. So when you look at the what's going on from talent perspective, nationally and even globally, there are a lot of companies, the Accentures of the world, the B of A's of the world, who are already way out ahead in terms of inclusion. And so what's happening is that you're seeing a lot of the early movers who are already pretty far ahead. And from our work and from other people's research, when you do inclusion, it's probably a 3 to 5 year range. It's going to take about that long for you to really do it, because it's a cultural and process change. So if you've got some leaders that are out there already, say 2 years in, and you're still waiting to decide. So now you've got a 3 to 5 year window before you can catch up, and they're already ahead. You can start to see that the competitive gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the longer companies wait, the further behind they are competitively, because this is no longer a choice. It's not if, but when. And so that's the other frame that we really talk about within our book. And then the other piece, and then we can go into this in more detail, is really we have 3 big components. So if you're really going to do inclusion, you first off have to think about the mindset, which is, how do we think about inclusion? How do we think about diversity? Then you got to think about the skill set. What skills do we need to be inclusive? And then the last thing you have to think about is the environment and the processes. What do you have to change in order to do that?
And then in your book, you focus on, you cover 3 important components: the mindset, the skill set, and the environment. And I think you
Right.
just kind of touched on all 3 as
Yeah.
you were kind of highlighting, those companies that have already started. And even the companies that have already started, we're finding from our research, and we just closed out of several studies this summer on inclusion and diversity, that, one out of, or, 1 out of 2 companies find that their programs are effective.
Mm-hmm.
And those that are, that have done diversity training and that have, diversity initiatives, there's still gaps, and they're still finding some that are ineffective. And those, I think, companies that are further along, they're tying it into a much bigger initiative. You don't just provide a diversity training program to check the box. You really kind of make sure that it's leading from one thing to another. then it's circling back to your integrated talent strategy
Yeah.
and your talent acquisition strategy. So there's so many facets that really impact the effectiveness of this type of initiative or this focus.
Yeah.
So can you expand a little bit about the mindset, the environment, and the third component that you have, the skill set?
Yeah. So when we think about mindset, this is the one where I think a lot of companies fail. So you talk about the checkbox. I mean, how many times have people like, okay, we're going to send everybody to diversity training, done? And of course, it doesn't work because the mindset there is that this is all about compliance. So when you have a compliance mindset is around fear. It's around protecting your risk, right? It's about make sure we're covered in case anybody sues. Well, the mindset that we're talking about is we actually want to create an environment where we're leveraging all the talent in our organization. Because are we? Because likely not. If we got a lot of homogeneity, for example, at the top of organizations, which is true in most organizations, then clearly we're not leveraging all of our talent. So how do we figure it out? So the mindset says we want to be inclusive because it makes business sense. And it's also about being reflective and saying, okay, where are our biases? Where is it that we have biases that we're not even aware of? It's about opening up our eyes. And oftentimes what ends up happening is this is the iterative process, which is why you can't do a one and done, because it takes time to practice it and to get the pushback and learn. So once you get the willingness, which is the mindset piece, then there's the skill set. So in our research that we did with you last year, we found that 21% of senior leaders had the skills to be inclusive. So we're sitting here saying, okay, be inclusive, and they don't know how to do it. So how can we expect leaders to be inclusive if they don't have the skill sets to do that? So we really think about the skill sets as something that needs to be overtly managed across the organizational hierarchy. It can't just be everybody think about bias. It's got to be about what is the impact of bias and how do we want to think about it and how does it show up. And so we have this taxonomy where we really talk about diversity, and then we talk about inclusion, then we talk about voice and engagement, and then we talk about synergy. And so these four levels, these four skill set levels that enable leaders to really be inclusive. So for example, one of the skills is how do you facilitate decision making? And how do you ensure that that decision isn't made before the meeting even comes in? And so it's a pre-gone conclusion and you're not even bringing in all the different voices. So it's something that sounds so simple and yet it's not trained. And then the third area is this idea of the environment or the processes. And the environment means that a lot of times what ends up happening, what you see with a lot of diversity, it becomes PC. So people are afraid to say anything, they're afraid to do anything. And what ends up happening is it's not a psychologically safe environment. So the very first thing you have to do is take this idea of how can we create an environment across our organization where people can try out new things and get feedback. And it's not like the death of their career, it's an experimentation. And then the question is, how do we start peeling back the layers across the processes? So we look at processes, about 12 different layers of processes. But for example, you might look at hiring and say, okay, how are we in terms of our hiring, in terms of where we want to be from an inclusive perspective? And so hiring, you have to look at where are we going? Where are we sourcing? How are we interviewing? How are we onboarding? How are we integrating? And so you're looking at it across the process and seeing where are we effective already and where do we need to work? Promotions, performance evaluation, culture, even how you deal with customers. So all these different areas need to be examined and reflected on how is bias embedded here and how can we change that process so that it becomes more inclusive. And remember, always in line or in pursuit of the overall strategy that inclusive enables us to leverage all of our talent, because that is the basis of innovation and competition.
We had a discussion on this in one of our webinars recently, and a lot of the questions I saw that was coming in from the audience is how do you get started and how do you assess your diversity needs or your gaps? What kind of assessments are there out there? And there's a ton of assessments. I think it's really important that you do some, whether it's pulse surveys or engagement assessments. I think it's not just one assessment that's going to give you the breadth and depth of what you're looking at? And you have an assessment as well. What does that cover?
So our assessment, so a lot of times we ask, because you ask, where do people start? And I think that's a really important question, because what we find is that some companies want to start with the assessment, where are we? Some companies want to start with some initial training and skill set, or leveling of the vocabulary, for example. What is it that we want? Some of them want to start at the visioning stage and say, okay, what does inclusion mean for us? So everybody's at a different level. And so I think we have multiple entry points in our process so that people can get where they need to be. But in terms of the assessment, this is where we go to these 12 categories and we evaluate each one of them. And so basically what we do is we do a tripartite approach. So we do the survey, which is a survey assessment. And this is typically coming from the C level. And because it's coming from the C level, we usually get between 60 and 70% response rate. So the data is quite rigorous. And then we also look at the HR data. And HR data can tell us things like, what's the velocity of promotion by race, by gender. We can also look at what is the hiring velocity. So how are you hiring and how long are they staying? So there's all sorts of ways that you can analyze the data. Now, depending upon the company, some companies have better data than others. So that's another piece. And then our third area is we do qualitative interviews. So we really use qualitative research approaches to get into the nuance. And so by looking at it from all three pieces, we can really take a holistic view of the company. And then from there, we can work with the company to figure out, okay, how do we make these changes based on not just change everything, but what are the big points? Where are the big pain points? And let's start there in a pilot way and make change in a pilot way and measure it. And the key component of our focus is this idea of constant measurement. So everybody's got key performance indicators. So all we're saying is bring some of those in so that then you have an ongoing measurement. So you don't have to assess every year. You basically build it into your engagement survey, or you build it into your HR system, or you build it into your performance evaluation system so that it's an ongoing part of the way you operate. Because once it becomes part of the way you operate, you don't have to think about it anymore. Then it's just that now it's a new habit. And that's where we want to get to. Because once you have a new habit, it's not this big change.
We advise that all the time from a learning measurement best practice, is that you really need to start at the beginning when you are when you're delivering a program or creating the program, and identify what is it that you're looking, what are you trying to accomplish. You can always add to it, but you know, at the very beginning, you got to start with something, not go back a year or even months after you've launched it to then determine what are the success stories, or what does success look like. You got to start at the beginning, and it makes it much easier and way more effective or powerful when you can see, you know, is it having an impact? And if it's not having an impact, what do you need to do to change? Or perhaps it's nothing major. Maybe it's just a fine few things you need to add to it or take away from it or adjust, but have that continuous measurement piece at the very beginning and along, so that you're not trying to then develop something that's so arduous or disconnected, you know, over time.
Exactly.
Right.
And you know what's really interesting? We were talking about COVID when we started. I think one of the cool things about COVID is that, you know, when people make these changes, you always, there's this disequilibrium, right? And that's painful. People don't like it. And so what we've been telling people is that COVID gave you the disequilibrium. So now what you can do is you can actually reconvene and reestablish these new norms with all this stuff built in. So if you build it in now, you actually probably have another 6 months window where you can start to just build this in, so that when people start working in the new normal, once it comes back to normal again, it's built in. It's so much easier because COVID gave us the chaos. And so you don't have to create the chaos. COVID gave it to us. It's a gift. We could use it. So we're trying to really help people to think that, and reframe that thinking as an opportunity.
I think a lot of people are starting to look at it that way. You know, at least from our end, you know, those that are sitting, you know, in our industry that are responsible for people development, that are responsible for people in the organization, they're looking at this as an opportunity to enhance what they've been doing, transition, transform what you know hasn't worked, or you know, and I'm not, you know, eventually I know we'll get together in person to some extent, but I think that the way that technology has been driving transformation and the way that we deliver development has been I think it's been a long journey for them being able to provide the ROI. And now
Yeah.
here we are in a situation where we have, we have to interact this way, and we're seeing that it does work.
Yeah.
And we still need that human connection. Thank goodness for the virtual meetings that we have and
I
being able
know.
to. And I think in the future there'll be a mix. There'll be, there'll be the need to be in person again and to be able to create those relationships and reconnect, and then that will always be treasured. But I think
Yeah.
also finding the right balance and seeing how effective technology can be.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think the same thing. Everybody's like, "Oh, it's going to go back." Like Netflix is like, "Everybody's coming back," and then other people are like, Twitter, "We're never coming back." And I really think it's going to be like you said, it's in the middle. It's going to be a combination of things, but I think it's changing people's view on what virtual working is about. It's not as mysterious as everybody thought.
I agree. Well, Jodi, thank you so much. Anything else that you'd like to share today before we wrap up?
I think the only thing I would like to say is that I think a lot of people get stuck in the where should I start? And I think my recommendation would be is just start. I don't think you have to worry about if it's right, wrong. There's no perfection. We talked about perfection earlier. So I think there's just opportunity in starting and then working from there and learning as you go and making it something that's just inculcated throughout the organization.
Good point. And also to add to that, if you have already started and you are somewhere mid-journey, just look for ways to recap, level set, understand, what's working, what's not working, and keep going. Don't get discouraged if the results aren't quite there, because
Yeah.
it's a journey.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree.
And we're excited about the work you're doing at Brandon Hall Group, where we just launched our learning certification last week. So that's really exciting. We're looking at all of our practices, and next we're working on an HR certification as well as a inclusion and diversity certification. So it's been great collaborating with you, Jodi, and
Yes.
I look forward to continuing to do so in the future.
Thanks, Rachel. A lot of fun. Always good working with you.
And thank you everyone for listening in, and also if you're watching, however the experience is for you, we hope that the information we share to here is just helpful, and we look forward to chatting again soon. Take care.